Sarah Martinez stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, her frame so delicate that a strong gust of wind seemed capable of knocking her over. At 22 years old, she possessed the kind of gentle appearance that made strangers instinctively want to protect her. Her dark eyes held an intensity that most people missed, too focused on her petite stature and soft-spoken demeanor to notice the steel beneath the surface. The decision to enlist in the Marines had shocked everyone who knew her. Her parents, both college professors, had spent weeks trying to convince her to reconsider. Her friends from university couldn't understand why someone with a degree in psychology would choose military service over a comfortable career in counseling. Even her boyfriend at the time had laughed, suggesting she might be better suited for the Peace Corps. But Sarah had her reasons that went deeper than anyone realized. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, she had witnessed violence that shaped her understanding of the world. She remembered hiding in closets while her mother dealt with an abusive stepfather, feeling helpless and small. She remembered walking past drug dealers on her way to school, seeing the fear in other children's eyes. Most of all, she remembered making a promise to herself that she would never again be powerless to protect the people she cared about. The day she walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station, Sergeant Williams had looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. He was a mountain of a man, all muscle and intimidating presence, with scars that told stories of battles fought in distant lands. His first question wasn't about her motivation or qualifications, but whether she was sure she had walked into the right building. The physical fitness test had been her first real challenge. While she struggled with pull-ups and the longer runs, something in her determination caught the recruiter's attention. She might not have been the strongest candidate, but she refused to quit. When other potential recruits gave up halfway through exercises, Sarah pushed through until completion, even if it meant finishing last. The paperwork process revealed more about her than her physical appearance suggested. Her college grades were exceptional. Her psychological profile showed remarkable resilience, and her background check came back cleaner than most. Still, when Sergeant Williams recommended her for infantry training, his supervisor raised eyebrows. Women in combat roles were still relatively new, and someone of Sarah's build seemed particularly unlikely to succeed. The weeks leading up to boot camp were filled with preparation. Sarah transformed her daily routine into a training regimen that would have impressed professional athletes. She woke at 4 in the morning to run, spent her lunch breaks doing bodyweight exercises, and dedicated her evenings to studying military history and tactics. Her small apartment became a makeshift gym, every available space used for different workout stations. Her family watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. Her younger brother, initially dismissive of her military ambitions, began to see a different side of his sister. The gentle psychology student was still there, but something harder and more determined was emerging alongside her natural compassion. The night before leaving for Paris Island, Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of belongings she wouldn't need for the next several months. Her mother found her there, staring at old photos from high school and college. The conversation that followed would stay with both of them for years to come. Her mother asked the question that had been haunting the entire family. Why was she really doing this? Sarah's answer revealed the depth of her commitment. She spoke about wanting to be strong enough to protect others, about understanding that sometimes violence was the only language that certain people understood, and about refusing to be dismissed because of her appearance or gender. The drive to the airport was quiet, filled with the weight of impending separation. Sarah's father, a man who had never fully understood his daughter's decision, surprised everyone by telling her how proud he was. Her mother cried, but they were tears of understanding rather than just sadness. They finally grasped that this wasn't a phase or rebellion, but a calling that had been building inside their daughter for years. At the departure gate, Sarah looked around at the other recruits heading to boot camp. Most were young men, many of them larger and seemingly more physically prepared for what lay ahead. A few other women were scattered throughout the group, but even among them, Sarah stood out for her small stature. She could see the doubt in people's eyes, the silent questions about whether she belonged there. The flight to South Carolina gave her time to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about all the people who had underestimated her throughout her life, all the times she had been overlooked or dismissed because of her appearance. She thought about the promise she had made to herself as a frightened child, and how every step since then had been leading to this opportunity. As the plane descended toward the airport, Sarah felt a calm settle over her that surprised even her. The nervous energy that had been building for weeks transformed into focused determination. She knew the challenges ahead would test every aspect of her character, that drill instructors would try to break her down and build her back up into something stronger. Looking out the window at the unfamiliar landscape below, Sarah made another promise to herself. She would prove that strength came in many forms, that determination could overcome physical limitations, and that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous when pushed to their limits. She had no idea that within a few months, she would become living proof of these beliefs in ways that would shock everyone around her. The other recruits on the plane chatted nervously about what awaited them, sharing stories they had heard about Marine boot camp and speculating about who would make it through the training. Sarah listened quietly, already beginning to observe and assess the personalities around her. Some boasted about their high school athletic achievements. Others worried aloud about the physical demands they would face. None of them paid much attention to the small woman sitting in the window seat, reading quietly from a worn book about military strategy. They had no way of knowing that their assumptions about her would soon be challenged in ways they never imagined possible. The yellow footprints at Paris Island were legendary among Marines, marking the spot where countless recruits had taken their first steps toward becoming warriors. When Sarah stepped off the bus at 3 a.m, the humid South Carolina air hit her like a wall, thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and decades of military tradition. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to notice her among the chaos of new arrivals. His voice cut through the darkness like a blade as he organized the confused mass of recruits into formation. When his eyes fell on Sarah, his expression shifted from routine intimidation to something approaching disbelief. At barely 5'3" and weighing maybe 115 pounds soaking wet, she looked more like someone's little sister than a potential Marine. The first few days of processing were a blur of medical examinations, paperwork, and initial assessments. Sarah watched as the drill instructors sized up each recruit, making mental notes about who they thought would succeed and who would likely wash out before graduation. She could feel their skepticism every time they looked in her direction, but she also noticed something else in Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's gaze: curiosity rather than dismissal. During the initial physical training assessments, Sarah's limitations became apparent to everyone. She struggled with pull-ups, managing only 3 when the minimum standard was 8. Her run times were adequate but not impressive. When it came to carrying heavy equipment, she was clearly at a disadvantage compared to her larger counterparts. The other recruits began to whisper among themselves, wondering how she had even made it through the initial screening process. Private Johnson, a former college football player from Texas, was among the most vocal critics. Standing 6'4" and weighing 240 pounds of solid muscle, he represented everything that people expected from a Marine recruit. During breaks in training, he would make comments loud enough for Sarah to hear about charity cases and political correctness gone too far. His followers laughed at his jokes, creating an atmosphere of doubt around Sarah's presence in the platoon. The living quarters intensified the social dynamics. In the squad bay where all the recruits slept, Sarah's bunk was surrounded by much larger recruits who seemed to take up enormous amounts of space. Their equipment dwarfed hers, their voices were louder, and their confidence seemed unshakable. She became even more quiet than usual, focusing on her own preparation while the others bonded through shared complaints about the difficulty of training. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez began implementing additional training sessions specifically designed to push the weaker recruits. Sarah found herself grouped with several others who were struggling with various aspects of the program. The extra physical training was brutal, but she approached it with the same quiet determination that had carried her through her preparation back home. While others complained or made excuses, she simply worked harder. The turning point came during the 3rd week of training, during a hand-to-hand combat instruction session. Marine Corps martial arts program training was mandatory for all recruits, regardless of their size or background. The instructor, Sergeant First Class Thompson, was a compact man with decades of experience in various martial arts disciplines. Unlike some of the other drill instructors, he seemed genuinely interested in teaching rather than just intimidating. During the demonstration phase, Sergeant Thompson explained the principles behind Marine Corps martial arts. He emphasized that the system was designed to be effective regardless of size differences, focusing on leverage, timing, and exploiting an opponent's vulnerabilities rather than relying purely on strength. Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the instruction, her psychology background helping her understand the mental aspects of combat as much as the physical techniques. The practical application began with basic grappling exercises. Recruits were paired up randomly, and Sarah found herself facing Private Morrison, a 19-year-old from Ohio who had been a high school wrestler. At 180 pounds, he had nearly 60 pounds on her, but he was also clearly holding back, unwilling to use his full strength against someone so much smaller. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. As Morrison attempted a basic takedown, Sarah's instincts kicked in with a clarity that shocked her. The countless hours she had spent studying combat techniques, combined with her natural speed and flexibility, allowed her to counter his move with a fluid motion that sent him to the mat. The squad bay fell silent as the larger recruit looked up in confusion, unsure how he had ended up on his back. Sergeant Thompson nodded approvingly and instructed them to reset. This time Morrison approached with more seriousness, but the result was similar. Sarah's movements were economical and precise, using her opponent's momentum against him and finding openings that his size prevented him from defending effectively. By the end of the session, word had begun to spread throughout the platoon about the tiny recruit who was apparently much more dangerous than she appeared. Private Johnson, who had been watching from across the training area, approached Sarah after the session with a different expression than she had seen before. The mockery was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity about where she had learned to fight. When she explained that most of her knowledge came from books and videos rather than formal training, his skepticism returned, but it was mixed with a grudging respect. The drill instructors began to take notice as well. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been waiting for Sarah to wash out like so many other unlikely recruits before her, started paying closer attention to her performance in all areas of training. Her written test scores were consistently among the highest in the platoon. Her attention to detail was exceptional, and her attitude remained positive despite the physical challenges she faced daily. The other female recruits in the platoon also began to see Sarah differently. Initially, some had been concerned that her struggles would reflect poorly on all of them, as the integration of women into combat roles was still controversial. Now they realized that she might actually be proving something important about the potential contributions of female Marines. As the weeks progressed, the hand-to-hand combat training became more advanced. Sarah continued to excel, her techniques becoming more refined and her confidence growing with each session. She began to understand that her size, which everyone saw as a weakness, was actually an advantage in many situations. She was faster than the larger recruits, more flexible, and able to get into positions that they couldn't reach or defend against. The psychological aspect of combat also played to her strengths. Her background in psychology helped her read opponents' intentions and emotional states, giving her an edge in predicting their moves and exploiting their hesitations. She learned to use surprise as a weapon, knowing that most opponents would underestimate her based on her appearance alone. By the end of the month, Sarah had established herself as one of the most technically skilled fighters in the platoon. Despite still struggling with some of the purely physical aspects of training, the recruit who had once been seen as the weakest link was beginning to be recognized as potentially one of the most dangerous, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. The tension that had been building within the platoon finally reached a breaking point during the 7th week of training. Sarah had continued to excel in hand-to-hand combat sessions while still struggling with some physical fitness benchmarks, creating a confusing dynamic that frustrated both supporters and critics. The larger recruits, led by Private Johnson, had begun to question whether her martial arts skills were just lucky breaks or carefully controlled demonstrations that wouldn't translate to real combat situations. The controversy intensified when Sarah achieved a perfect score on the written portion of the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program test, demonstrating a theoretical understanding of combat principles that impressed even the instructors. Private Davidson, a former amateur boxer from Detroit, loudly suggested that knowing techniques on paper was very different from applying them under real pressure against multiple opponents who weren't holding back. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found himself in a difficult position. Sarah's technical proficiency was undeniable, But questions about her ability to handle genuine physical confrontation were affecting platoon morale. Some recruits were beginning to wonder if the standards were being adjusted for political reasons, while others defended her growing reputation as a skilled fighter. The division was becoming problematic for unit cohesion. The situation came to a head during a field training exercise designed to test leadership under pressure. The platoon was divided into small squads tasked with completing various challenges while competing against each other. Sarah was assigned to lead a squad that included several of her harshest critics, including Privates Johnson and Davidson, along with Morrison, who had developed a grudging respect for her abilities. The exercise took place in a wooded area of the base, with squads moving through different stations that tested everything from navigation skills to problem-solving under stress. Sarah's squad started strong, with her analytical mind helping them solve complex tactical problems more efficiently than other groups. Her ability to read maps and understand terrain gave them significant advantages in the navigation challenges. However, the physical obstacles proved more difficult. When the squad encountered a wall that required team lifting and cooperation, Sarah's size became a liability. She couldn't provide the same lifting power as other squad members, forcing the team to adjust their strategies. Johnson made several comments about dead weight that were clearly directed at her. Though he was careful not to be openly insubordinate, the turning point came at the final station, where squads faced a simulated combat scenario, involving close quarters fighting against instructors playing enemy forces. Each squad member had to demonstrate their ability to neutralize an opponent before the team could advance. The instructors, all experienced Marines, were not going to make it easy for anyone. Sarah watched as her squad mates took their turns. Johnson, with his size and strength, managed to overpower his opponent through brute force, though his technique was sloppy. Davidson used his boxing background to good effect, landing clean strikes that earned approval from the observing instructors. Morrison relied on his wrestling experience to control his opponent on the ground. When Sarah's turn came, she faced Corporal Williams, a compact but muscular instructor known for his aggressive fighting style. The other squad members, along with several recruits from competing squads who had finished their turns, gathered to watch. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, as many saw this as the moment when Sarah would finally be exposed as inadequate for real combat. Corporal Williams didn't underestimate Sarah the way her fellow recruits had initially. He had been watching her progress and understood that her reputation was based on legitimate skill rather than luck. He approached the engagement with full seriousness, intending to test her abilities thoroughly without seriously injuring her. The match began with Williams using his reach advantage to keep Sarah at distance while testing her reactions with probing strikes. Sarah moved with fluid grace, avoiding his attacks while looking for openings. Her footwork was exceptional, keeping her in positions where his size advantage was minimized. The watching recruits began to quiet down as they realized they were witnessing something more sophisticated than they had expected. Williams increased the pressure, launching a series of combination attacks designed to overwhelm her defenses. Sarah absorbed what she couldn't avoid, using proper technique to minimize damage while continuing to look for counterattack opportunities. Her breathing remained controlled, and her movement stayed economical, conserving energy while her opponent expended his trying to land decisive strikes. The breakthrough came when Williams committed to a powerful right cross that Sarah had been subtly encouraging through her positioning. She slipped the punch by millimeters, simultaneously grabbing his extended arm and using his forward momentum to throw him off balance. Before he could recover, she had transitioned to his back and applied a chokehold with textbook precision. The speed of the reversal stunned everyone watching. One moment, Williams had been pressing his attack with apparent success, and the next he was tapping out to signal his submission. Sarah released the hold immediately and helped him to his feet, showing the respect and professionalism that had been drilled into all of them throughout training. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing quietly from the side, stepped forward to address the assembled recruits. His voice carried across the training area as he explained what they had just witnessed. Sarah hadn't gotten lucky or benefited from her opponent holding back. She had demonstrated superior technique, tactical thinking, and the ability to remain calm under pressure while facing a larger, stronger opponent. The instructor emphasized that combat effectiveness wasn't always about who could lift the most weight or run the fastest time. Sometimes it was about who could think clearly when violence erupted, who had the technical skills to exploit opportunities, and who had the mental toughness to execute under extreme pressure. In all of these areas, Sarah had just proven herself against a trained opponent. Private Johnson, who had been among the most vocal critics, found himself in an uncomfortable position. He had been proven wrong in front of the entire group, and his assumptions about what made an effective Marine had been challenged. Some of the other recruits looked at him expectantly, waiting to see how he would respond to this demonstration of Sarah's capabilities. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of stunned silence and whispered conversations as recruits processed what they had seen. Sarah herself seemed almost surprised by how smoothly the engagement had gone, though she tried to remain humble about her performance. She helped gather equipment and prepared for the squad's final movement back to base, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had changed within the platoon dynamic. The recruit who had been seen as a potential liability had just demonstrated that she might actually be one of the most dangerous fighters among them. The question now was whether this single impressive performance would be enough to change long-held assumptions, or if she would need to prove herself again when the stakes were even higher. The news of Sarah's performance against Corporal Williams spread throughout the training battalion faster than wildfire. By evening, recruits from other platoons were asking questions about the tiny woman who had supposedly choked out an instructor. The story grew with each telling, though the basic facts remained impressive enough without embellishment. Staff, Sergeant Rodriguez found himself fielding inquiries from other drill instructors who wanted to see this remarkable recruit for themselves. Master Sergeant Collins, the senior drill instructor for the entire company, made a point of observing Sarah during the next day's training sessions. His reputation for spotting exceptional Marines was legendary, and his opinion carried significant weight throughout the base. The attention made Sarah uncomfortable, but she handled it with the same quiet professionalism she had maintained throughout training. She continued to struggle with pull-ups and longer distance runs, reminding everyone that her talents were specific rather than universal. However, her confidence in combat situations had grown noticeably, and she carried herself with a different kind of presence than before. Private Johnson's attitude toward Sarah underwent a dramatic transformation. The confrontation with his own prejudices had forced him to reevaluate not just his opinion of her, but his understanding of what made someone an effective warrior. He approached her after a particularly grueling physical training session to offer a sincere apology for his earlier comments and behavior. The conversation between them revealed depths to both, characters that their fellow recruits hadn't seen before. Johnson admitted that his mockery had come from his own insecurities about whether he was tough enough for the Marines, and that picking on someone smaller had made him feel more confident about his own abilities. Sarah, in turn, shared some of her background and the experiences that had driven her to seek military service. Their newfound mutual respect became a model for the rest of the platoon. The divisions that had formed during the early weeks of training began to heal, as recruits realized that everyone brought different strengths to the team. Sarah's analytical mind and tactical thinking complemented Johnson's physical strength and natural leadership qualities, creating a partnership that made their entire squad more effective. The harmony was tested when the company prepared for the Crucible, the final 54-hour test that would determine who earned the title of Marine. The event combined everything they had learned over the previous months into an exhausting trial of physical endurance, mental toughness, and teamwork under extreme stress. Many recruits who had made it through the earlier phases of training would fail during this ultimate challenge. Master Sergeant Collins personally briefed Sarah before the Crucible began. His words were measured and serious as he explained that the event would push her beyond anything she had experienced so far. The physical demands would be relentless, the sleep deprivation would affect decision-making, and she would need to dig deeper than ever before to find the strength to continue when her body wanted to quit. The first day of the Crucible tested every weakness Sarah had struggled with throughout training. The long marches with heavy packs pushed her small frame to its limits, and she fell behind the main group several times. Johnson and several other recruits took turns helping her with her equipment, sharing water and offering encouragement when she clearly wanted to collapse. During the night navigation exercise, however, Sarah's strengths became apparent. While other recruits struggled to read maps in the darkness and became confused by the challenging terrain, She moved with confidence and precision. Her squad relied on her expertise to find their objectives and complete their missions, often arriving ahead of groups led by physically stronger but less technically skilled Marines. The combat simulation exercises scattered throughout the Crucible provided opportunities for Sarah to demonstrate her fighting skills under increasingly realistic conditions. Sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion affected everyone's performance, but her technical training remained sharp, even when her body was operating on reserves. She successfully completed every combat challenge, often with a precision that impressed the evaluating instructors. The most memorable moment came during a night ambush simulation. Sarah's squad was tasked with infiltrating an enemy position defended by instructors playing opposing forces. The mission required stealth coordination and the ability to neutralize sentries without alerting the main force. Sarah volunteered to take point, using her small size and quiet movement to scout the position and identify the best approach. Moving through the darkness like a shadow, she managed to get within striking distance of the first sentry without being detected. The takedown was swift and silent, demonstrating not just her fighting skills but her ability to apply them tactically in a realistic scenario. Her success allowed the rest of the squad to advance and complete their mission with textbook efficiency. As the Crucible entered its final phase, the accumulated stress began to take its toll on everyone. Some recruits who had seemed unstoppable earlier in training began to crack under the pressure, while others found reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. Sarah's performance remained consistently strong, though the physical challenges continued to push her to her absolute limits. The final team building exercise required squads to work together to overcome a series of obstacles that couldn't be completed by individual effort alone. Sarah's squad, now functioning as a unified team regardless of size differences, moved through the challenges with remarkable efficiency. Johnson used his strength to lift teammates over walls, while Sarah's agility allowed her to reach positions others couldn't access and help from above. During one particularly complex obstacle, Sarah found herself in a position where she needed to support the full weight of a much larger teammate while he maneuvered around a barrier. The physical demand was beyond anything she should have been able to handle, but her determination and the knowledge that her squad was depending on her gave her the strength to hold on until he reached safety. The final march back to the base was a blur of exhaustion and determination. Sarah's feet were destroyed by blisters. Her pack felt like it weighed twice what it had at the beginning, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest. But she kept moving, supported by squad mates who had learned to value her contributions and inspired by her own refusal to quit, when quitting would have been the easy choice. As they approached the finish line, Master Sergeant Collins was waiting with the other drill instructors to observe the final moments of the Crucible. His eyes found Sarah in the group, noting her condition and the way her squad mates had rallied around her during the most difficult portions of the test. The smile that crossed his face was barely visible, but it spoke volumes about his assessment of her performance. The ceremony where successful recruits earned the title of Marine was emotional for everyone involved, but for Sarah it represented something more than military achievement. Standing in formation despite her exhaustion, she realized that she had not only proven herself to others but had discovered capabilities within herself that she had never fully understood. The small woman who had been mocked during early training had emerged as one of the most respected members of her platoon, setting the stage for even greater challenges ahead. Fresh out of boot camp with the coveted title of Marine, Sarah found herself assigned to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina for advanced infantry training. The School of Infantry would test everything she had learned in boot camp while introducing new weapon systems, tactics, and the complex realities of modern warfare. For the first time since enlisting, she would be training alongside Marines from different backgrounds and experiences. Her reputation had preceded her to some degree, as instructors from Paris Island had passed along notes about exceptional recruits from their recent graduating classes. Staff Sergeant Morrison, her new primary instructor, was a combat veteran with 3 deployments who had heard whispers about a tiny female Marine with unusual fighting skills. He approached her arrival with professional curiosity, rather than the skepticism she had faced during boot camp. The advanced training environment was more intense than anything Sarah had experienced. The instructors assumed that everyone had already proven themselves worthy of the Marine title, so the focus shifted from breaking recruits down and building them back up to developing specific combat skills. The pace was relentless, the standards were higher, and there was less tolerance for weakness or hesitation. Sarah's first challenge came during weapons training with the M4 carbine. Her small frame, which had been an advantage in hand-to-hand combat, created difficulties with the standard-issue rifle. The weapon was designed for average-sized males, and she struggled initially with proper positioning and recoil management. Her marksmanship scores during the first week were mediocre, leading some of the new Marines she was training with to question the stories they had heard about her abilities. Lance Corporal Peters, a recent graduate from another training battalion, was particularly vocal about his doubts. He had excelled in marksmanship during his own training and couldn't understand how someone who struggled with basic rifle handling could have developed such a fearsome reputation. His comments during breaks in training echoed the familiar themes Sarah had heard before about physical standards and whether exceptions were being made. The situation was complicated by the presence of 5 other Marines who had transferred from different units for specialized training. These men were experienced combat veterans who had requested additional schooling in advanced tactics and urban warfare. Sergeant Davis, Corporal Thompson, Private First Class Rodriguez, Lance Corporal Mitchell, and Corporal Jackson brought real-world experience that made the training environment more serious and competitive. These veterans initially viewed all the new Marines with professional detachment, focusing on their own advanced curriculum, while the newer Marines completed basic infantry training. However, they couldn't help but notice the discussions about Sarah's supposed fighting abilities, and their skepticism was informed by actual combat experience rather than just training ground prejudices. The breakthrough in weapons training came when Staff Sergeant Morrison introduced urban combat scenarios that required more than just accurate shooting. Sarah's analytical mind allowed her to excel at tactical problem-solving, identifying enemy positions and planning engagement sequences with remarkable precision. Her small size, initially a disadvantage, became an asset when moving through confined spaces and taking cover positions that larger Marines couldn't utilize effectively. During a complex building clearing exercise, Sarah demonstrated an intuitive understanding of room entry techniques and close-quarters combat that impressed even the veteran Marines. Her movements were economical and precise, her decision-making was rapid and accurate, and she showed no hesitation when engaging simulated enemies at close range. The exercise revealed that her struggles with standard marksmanship were less important than her ability to apply weapon skills in realistic tactical situations. The tension between Sarah and Lance Corporal Peters escalated during a break in training when he openly questioned whether her reputation was based on actual ability or just politically motivated promotion. His comments were overheard by Sergeant Davis, one of the veteran Marines, who had been quietly observing Sarah's performance throughout the week. Davis's intervention was subtle but effective, suggesting that judgment should be based on observed performance rather than assumptions. The real test came during a Friday afternoon training session that had become traditional at the School of Infantry. Advanced students would demonstrate various combat techniques for newer Marines, creating learning opportunities while also establishing hierarchies within the training community. Staff Sergeant Morrison announced that this week's session would focus on close-quarters combat and defensive tactics against multiple opponents. Sergeant Davis volunteered to coordinate the demonstration, selecting 4 of his fellow veterans to participate in a scenario designed to teach newer Marines about fighting when outnumbered and surrounded. The exercise was intended to show how proper technique and tactical thinking could help someone survive overwhelming odds, even if ultimate victory wasn't possible. When Staff Sergeant Morrison asked for a volunteer from the newer Marines to serve as the demonstration subject, the training area fell silent. The prospect of facing 5 experienced combat veterans, even in a controlled training environment, was intimidating for anyone. The exercise was designed to be educational rather than competitive, but everyone understood that the volunteer would likely be overwhelmed regardless of their skill level. Sarah stepped forward before anyone else could respond. Her decision surprised everyone, including herself to some degree, but she felt compelled to address the ongoing questions about her abilities once and for all. The whispers and doubts had been building for weeks, and she realized that only a definitive demonstration would settle the matter permanently. The setup was carefully controlled by the instructors, with safety protocols in place to prevent serious injury, while still allowing realistic combat techniques. Sarah would be placed in the center of a marked circle, with the 5 veterans positioned around the perimeter. The objective was for her to demonstrate defensive techniques and try to neutralize as many opponents as possible before being overwhelmed. Lance Corporal Peters, watching from the sidelines with the other newer Marines, made a comment about how this would finally expose the truth about Sarah's supposed abilities. His confidence was shared by many of the observers, who expected to see the tiny Marine quickly overwhelmed by opponents with significant advantages in size, strength, and combat experience. The veteran Marines approached the exercise with professional seriousness. They understood that their reputation was also at stake, and they intended to conduct a thorough but controlled test of Sarah's abilities. Sergeant Davis reminded his teammates that the goal was education rather than humiliation, but also emphasized that they should not hold back to the point where the exercise became meaningless. As the participants took their positions, Sarah found herself at the center of a circle formed by 5 Marines who collectively outweighed her by more than 600 pounds. Each of them had real combat experience, advanced training, and years of experience in military operations. From any reasonable perspective, the outcome should have been predetermined before the exercise even began. Staff Sergeant Morrison called for the exercise to begin, and the 5 veterans began closing the circle with coordinated movements designed to limit Sarah's options for escape or evasion. The newer Marines watching from the sidelines held their breath, expecting to witness either a quick overwhelm or a valiant but doomed attempt at resistance. What happened next would be discussed and analyzed for months afterward, becoming part of the unofficial legend of the School of Infantry and establishing Sarah's reputation throughout the Marine Corps in ways that no amount of training scores or instructor recommendations could have achieved. The moment Staff Sergeant Morrison gave the signal to begin, time seemed to slow down for everyone watching. The 5 veteran Marines moved inward with practiced coordination, their years of combat experience evident in how they maintained spacing and communication while closing the circle. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center, her breathing controlled and her eyes constantly moving to track all 5 opponents simultaneously. Sergeant Davis made the first move, stepping forward with a testing jab designed to gauge Sarah's reaction speed and defensive capabilities. What happened next defied every expectation held by the observers. Instead of backing away or attempting to block the strike, Sarah moved forward into the attack, slipping past Davis's extended arm and striking him in the solar plexus with her elbow before he could react. The strike wasn't powerful enough to cause serious damage, but it was perfectly placed and timed to disrupt Davis's breathing and balance. Before he could recover, Sarah had already moved past him, using his momentarily disabled form as a shield against the other 4 Marines while she assessed her next opportunity. Corporal Thompson, approaching from Sarah's right flank, found himself facing an opponent who was no longer where he expected her to be. Sarah's movement had been so fluid and rapid that he was caught off guard, his planned attack targeting empty space while she positioned herself at an angle that made it difficult for multiple opponents to engage her simultaneously. Thompson's confusion lasted only seconds, but those seconds were enough for Sarah to exploit. She grabbed his extended arm and used a hip throw that sent the 190-pound Marine tumbling to the ground with surprising force. The technique was textbook perfect, utilizing his forward momentum and superior weight against him, while requiring minimal strength from her. Private First Class Rodriguez and Lance Corporal Mitchell attempted to coordinate their approach from opposite sides, thinking they could overwhelm her with simultaneous attacks. Sarah read their intentions with the tactical awareness that had impressed her instructors throughout training. Instead of trying to defend against both attacks, she moved toward Rodriguez while ducking under Mitchell's swing, causing the 2 Marines to collide with each other as their coordinated assault fell apart. The brief confusion gave Sarah the opening. She needed to strike Rodriguez with a precise nerve strike to his neck that temporarily paralyzed his left arm. The technique was one she had studied extensively but never used in a real situation, and its effectiveness surprised even her. Rodriguez stumbled backward, his arm hanging useless at his side while he tried to understand what had happened. Corporal Jackson, the largest of the 5 veterans at 220 pounds, had been hanging back to observe Sarah's tactics before committing to his own attack. His patience proved to be a mistake, as it allowed Sarah to reduce the odds against her before facing him. When he finally moved forward, He was facing an opponent who had already demonstrated capabilities far beyond what anyone had expected. Jackson's approach was more cautious than his teammates, but Sarah had learned to read hesitation as clearly as aggression. She feinted left, drawing his defensive reaction, then spun right and swept his legs with a technique that sent him crashing to the ground. Before he could attempt to get up, she had moved to his side and applied a joint lock that would have broken his arm if she had chosen to apply full pressure. The entire sequence, from the beginning of the exercise to Jackson tapping out in submission, had taken less than 90 seconds. 5 experienced combat veterans lay on the ground in various states of temporary disability, while Sarah stood in the center of the circle, barely breathing hard and completely in control of the situation. The silence that followed was absolute. Every Marine watching the demonstration struggled to process what they had witnessed. These weren't new recruits or training instructors going easy on a smaller opponent. These were combat veterans with real-world experience who had approached the exercise with professional seriousness, and they had been systematically dismantled by someone who weighed less than any 2 of them combined. Staff Sergeant Morrison, who had seen exceptional Marines throughout his career, found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about combat effectiveness. Sarah's performance hadn't been based on luck or her opponents underestimating her. Every movement had been deliberate and precise. Every technique had been applied with perfect timing, and her tactical awareness had allowed her to control a chaotic situation against overwhelming odds. Sergeant Davis, still catching his breath from the solar plexus strike, was the first to speak. His words carried across the silent training area as he addressed Sarah directly, offering his respect for her performance and acknowledging that he had learned something important about making assumptions based on appearance. His teammates echoed his sentiment, each of them impressed not just by her technique but by her restraint in avoiding serious injury to any of them. Lance Corporal Peters, who had been among the most vocal skeptics, stood speechless among the other newer Marines. The demonstration had obliterated every argument he had made about physical standards and combat effectiveness. He realized that his own understanding of what made someone dangerous in combat had been fundamentally flawed, based more on stereotypes than actual tactical knowledge. The aftermath of the demonstration rippled through the entire School of Infantry. Word spread beyond the immediate training company to other units on the base, and Sarah found herself the subject of intense curiosity from Marines throughout Camp Lejeune. Instructors who had never worked with her requested her personnel file, wanting to understand how someone with her background had developed such exceptional combat skills. Master Sergeant Williams, the senior enlisted advisor for the School of Infantry, personally reviewed the incident report and video footage from the training session. His analysis confirmed what everyone had witnessed. Sarah's performance represented a level of tactical fighting skill that was rare even among special operations forces. Her ability to process multiple threats simultaneously while executing complex techniques under pressure suggested natural talents that could be developed into something truly exceptional. The recognition brought new opportunities and challenges. Sarah was recommended for advanced combat training programs that were typically reserved for Marines with years of experience. Special operations recruiters began expressing interest in her potential, though she would need to complete additional training and gain operational experience before being eligible for such programs. More importantly, the demonstration had settled the questions about her place in the Marine Corps once and for all. No one would ever again suggest that she was a liability to her unit or that standards had been lowered to accommodate her. Instead, she had become living proof that combat effectiveness came in many forms, and that the most dangerous opponents were often those who were underestimated by their enemies. Years later, when Sarah had become a decorated combat veteran with multiple deployments, Marines would still talk about the day she dropped 5 experienced fighters in under 2 minutes. The story became part of Marine Corps lore, told in training facilities around the world as an example of why assumptions about physical appearance could be deadly in combat situations. For Sarah herself, the demonstration represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with a frightened child, hiding in closets, and a determination never to be powerless again. She had proven to herself and everyone around her that strength came in many forms, that technique could overcome raw power, and that the quiet ones were indeed often the most dangerous. When the situation demanded it, the small woman who had been mocked as fragile during her early training had become exactly what she had always intended to be, a warrior capable of protecting others and herself, regardless of what anyone expected based on her appearance. The Marines who had doubted her capabilities learned an important lesson about the dangers of underestimating an opponent, while those who supported her felt validated in their belief that the Corps was strongest when it recognized talent in all its forms.